and welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you're a returning viewer. I'm Maisie, and this is Maisie with a Z, and today for Bookmas Day 10, I'm going to be talking about some wintry fantasy book recs. I love fantasy books, and I love wintry feeling books, so, this seemed like a perfect intersection, and since it's about the end of December, it seems like a great time of year to do this sort of list. First book I'm going to be talking about, or the first series I'm going to be talking about, is the Winter Night Trilogy by Catherine Arden. And this is historical fantasy. It's set in Russia. It starts out following our main character, Vasya, which is short for Vasilisa, who lives in a very rural town. And the first book basically starts out with her mother died giving birth to her, and when she's like 10-ish, her father goes to Moscow to get a new stepmother for her, and stepmother comes back and she's very devoutly Christian and bans any discussion of or offerings for the traditional household spirits. This kind of leads to a lot of issues, and the entire series is very much about this conflict between Christianity and traditional folklore beliefs. And it's really good fantasy. Vasya's character arc over the trilogy is so good, and it really grows in scope from the first book to the third as she grows. I don't know, it's really wonderful. It's genuinely one of the best fantasy series I've ever read, and I'd highly recommend it. Like, it is magical, it reads like a fairy tale. Vasya is such a compelling protagonist, and it's really wonderful, and if you're looking for a wintry fantasy book, it cannot get more perfect than this. And then next up we have the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy by Stephanie Garber. This is a companion trilogy to Garber's Caravel trilogy, but you don't have to have read that in order to read this, where this is following mostly completely different characters. I mean, I still definitely recommend the Caravel series, it's great. You don't need to have read that to read this. This follows Evangeline Fox. She was raised to believe in fairy tales and happy endings, and her mother came from this country called the North, where stories are extremely important. The trilogy starts out with her finding out that the boy she loves is engaged to her stepsister, and to stop that wedding she prays to the Prince of Hearts, and he agrees to stop it in exchange for 3 kisses, but then he doesn't stop it in the way she wants, and a lot of things end up happening. But she ends up being sent to the Great North as a kind of ambassador, but also to take part in this ball through which the prince of the North will end up choosing a bride. The North as a setting is so wintry and simultaneously dark and whimsical, and it's just this really lovely story. It's so much about fairy tales and destiny and believing you can rewrite the endings to stories, and it's so good. I love this trilogy so much. The Ballad of Never After is the second book, and it's absolutely amazing, but the entire trilogy is great. So yeah, I'd say this is slightly less overtly wintry than the rest of the books in this list, but it's still really good. I highly recommend. And it still definitely does have wintry energy. Next up is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. I've talked about it a lot on my channel recently, but this follows Emily Wilde, who is a Cambridge professor who studies fairies. This is obviously set in a world where fairies are real, but she's a Cambridge professor who studies fairies. It's historical fantasy, but basically it follows her as she travels to a rural Scandinavian town to study the fairies there. She's joined by another professor at Cambridge who she's kind of reluctantly friends with. It's very cozy fantasy where fairies definitely play a part in this, but it's also very much about Emily learning to let other people in and learning to let other people care about her and learning to rely on other people, and I don't know, I just love it a lot. And the romance between her and the other professor is so cute, and I just love everything about it. I love the community of the village they're staying in, and I love Emily's character arc. She's very autistic coded, where I would be shocked if she were not written to be autistic, but I love her, and it's just so good. Next up is Down Comes the Night by Alison Saft. This is YA fantasy, enemies to lovers. This follows our protagonist Ren has healing magic, and her kingdom's been at war with this other kingdom for as long as anyone can remember. She's called to this lord's mansion in the third-party country to heal a patient, and it turns out that patient is Hal Cavendish, who is the most powerful magic user in the enemy kingdom, and the story is very much about these two learning to look past what they've always been taught about each other's countries and learning to let go of their own issues. And it's such a good romance, and it's a very gothic inspired setting in this cold, icy mansion surrounded by like wintry barrenness, which keeps them trapped there even if there's something suspicious going on that they're trying to figure out. And it's really good, and it's a really good wintry setting. I went into this book fully not expecting to like it that much, but I really enjoyed it. Like, if that sounds more like the wintry setting you're looking for, then I think this was a really good choice for you. And then next up is Grey Mist Fair by Francesca Zappia. And I received an e-arc of this back when it first came out. It's set in this like fairy tale-ish village in the middle of these dark forests. It's a murder mystery, and it takes the form of like about 8-ish stories, each following a different character in the village and each inspired by like a different lesser-known fairy tale. It's just this really interesting setting, and I really enjoyed the story structure of it, where I wasn't really expecting it going in, but I think the way it's told, where it's a different character leading each part of the narrative, is really successful. And I don't know, I love the fairy tale inspired aspect of it. Like, it's very atmospheric, it's very fairy tale inspired. It also cares a lot about its characters, and as atmospheric as it is and as eerie as it is, its characters are still very strong, and I think it's very well done, and it's a pretty quick read. Next up is Sophie and the Bone Song by Adrienne Tooley. This is a standalone sapphic fantasy set in a kingdom trapped in this kind of perpetual winter. This kingdom has a very complicated relationship with music, where there are 5 muses who are each play a different instrument, and they are the only people allowed to publicly perform music in this kingdom. So if you want to make a living as a musician, you have to get one of those positions. Sorry, they're called musics, not muses. But Sophie's father is the music who plays the lute, and she's been trained her entire life to take over that role. And he has instilled this repression and self-hatred into her that she believes is necessary, like a necessary devotion to like the muse of music in order to be able to play well. And she does play extremely well. When the day comes to audition to become the muse of the lute, another girl walks in, and she has never played the lute before, but she's somehow able to play it like perfectly, and she gets the spot that Sophie's been training her entire life for. Sophie is convinced that the girl used illegal magic in order to do it, so she sets out to try and prove the girl did something wrong. But along the way, like, Sophie's discovering things about the musics in general and about her own history that are kind of leading her to question everything she's always been taught. And it's a good like wintry fantasy, but it's primarily about Sophie's self-discovery and learning to accept herself and learning not to destroy herself for art. It's lovely and well written, and again, it's set in this like kingdom that's trapped in perpetual winter, which is an important aspect of the story. And if any of that sounds appealing, then you'll probably really enjoy it. Next up is a book I bring up every time I get a chance to on this channel, which is The Midnight Girls by Alicia Jasinska. This is sapphic witch enemies to lovers. It's a standalone YA fantasy, and it's set in like a historically inspired Poland. Basically, there are 3 powerful witches, and each have a mortal apprentice. So our 2 main characters are Zosia and Marinka. They've grown up in complete rivalries, where basically their mentors send them to steal the hearts of princes, because eating the hearts of princes is how these witches maintain their powers. So they've been sent to steal the heart of this one prince during Carnival season. It's set around this very wintry festival, and they're competing for this prince's heart amidst that. But meanwhile, they're also falling for each other, and so it's set in this very wintry setting, and it's about these monster girls learning that like they don't have to do what they've always been raised to do, and they're allowed to choose things for themselves, and they're falling for each other, and it's so cute, and I love them so much. And yeah, it's so fun. It's a pretty quick read. It's a standalone fantasy, and like, I don't know, this book makes me so happy. I love the contrast between the main plot and the setting, and I love our main character's dynamics. I love our secondary character. I just love all of it. It's so good. And this book deserves to be talked about more, because I never see anyone talking about it. Midnight Girls, I highly recommend. It's so good. And then our last book on this list is Witchwood by Tahara Mafi. And this is actually middle grade. It follows our main character, Laylee, who's a mortishore who is basically in charge of washing the bodies of the dead and making sure their spirits can pass on to like the afterlife. Since her mother died and her father kind of went insane with grief, She's only 12, but she's been charged with being the sole person carrying out these duties for this entire village, which is a lot to put on a 12-year-old. So doing so is gradually sucking the life out of her, where her hair is turning white, her skin's turning silver. When 2 other kids arrive from another town offering to help her, then it takes a lot for her to learn to like accept help and accept that this shouldn't be solely her burden to keep. Also, look at this beautiful cover. So yes, it's about this kid learning to accept help and to find any sort of joy in her life again. But it's set among this backdrop of very icy winter and ghosts, and it's very good. It's very atmospheric, it's very beautifully written, and if any of that sounds appealing, then you'll probably really enjoy this. But do keep in mind it's middle grade, so it's not the same complexity as some of the other books on this list. Yeah, that wraps up my wintry fantasy book recommendations. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found something that appeals to you here. I tried to have a good range of vibes. Thanks so much if you stuck around to the end. Please like, subscribe if you want to see more videos from me. Comment if you have any wintry fantasy book recs from me. I'd love to hear if you have any recommendations that are like these books on this list. And yes, you can find me on my blog, Instagram, Storygraph, and Goodreads at the links in my channel. And thanks again for sticking around to the end, and I will see you later.